Hello, hello. Hi, friends, and welcome to the Classroom of Life that is Stand Up with Pete Dominic, where every show we do our best to fight apathy and learn together from expert guests about the issues and ideas that matter to you, your family, your community, country, and your planet. Don't forget, you always got to put your mask on first before you can help anybody else. This is episode 19, and my guest today is retired Air Force Colonel Moe Davis. He is running for Congress in North Carolina's 11th District, first congressional candidate or politician I've ever given money to, I think. Before we get to Moe Davis, as he likes to be called, I want to mention the last episode, which got a ton of great feedback on. I welcomed Free Range Kids Lenore Skenazy to talk about how to raise resilient kids without going nuts and anxiety and worry all the time. And let me just share with you a little of that feedback because you're going to want to listen to this last episode. David, who took to patreon.com where he supports me, patreon.com/Pete Dominic. He supports me with a very generous $25 a month subscription. Thank you, David. He said, brilliant episode. Your show has always been a public service, but this episode in particular is, me being a parent of two young girls, absolutely essential for so many of my peers. I see good intentions all around, at parties, at the park, at the store, on my social media feeds, and they don't appear to recognize that they're swinging a double-edged sword. Bravo. And then he shared with me his childhood memories, because Lenore asked me for mine, and he said, I loved manhunt in the woods, building forts, digging ditches, hosting bonfires, swinging across the river on vines, and climbing trees. Staying up late playing video games with my brother. It's interesting, David wrote, that despite me deeply loving and cherishing both my parents, my favorite childhood memories don't involve them being with me, rather letting me be me, which I thought was awesome. I really like that a lot, David. And thank you very much for sending me that message and your support on Patreon. Then, everybody, I got my first video message, which was pretty cool. It's from a podcast listener named Shauna. You know, I never thought to really ask. I've thought about it, but I haven't asked people to record messages. But I love the idea that she sent me this video while she was on her commute to say what she loved about the conversation with Lenore, as well as the new functionality of the podcast as opposed to SiriusXM. Here is Shauna.
Hi, Pete. It's Shauna. I just listened to your episode with Lenore Skenazy and just wanted to say, great episode. I'm really glad that you have people on who talk about parenting. I am a new mom myself, and I know that when I was listening to your show on SiriusXM when I was pregnant, I would listen to your segments about parenting, and it really kind of helped mold my opinion about the kind of parent that I wanted to be. But you know, now that I am a mom, I definitely see how the how people can be kind of led into that helicopter parent you know, mind frame, and that like fear-based mind frame, and creating those habits in your mind that leads you to kind of not allowing your kids to grow and experience things more. So I think that it was really helpful for me as a new mom to kind of train my brain to, you know, as he gets older, want to provide him with the opportunities and experiences that allow him to be independent and respectful and smart and all the things. So I just wanted to say, great episode. Definitely love that topic. Sounds like you're really getting your stride back in the podcast, and I love it because I can only listen to your show really when I'm driving to work in the morning, and now I can just pause and listen to the whole thing versus trying to you know, miss part of it or try to go back on the app, which I never did.
I encourage you, thank you, Shauna. I encourage you to send messages any way you want. You can record them like that and email them to me at standupwithpete@gmail.com. And I'll set up a voicemail line that you can leave messages on as well, because I'd love getting your feedback and playing your feedback. And we're figuring out a way to go live. Some old listeners and I are working on that. Shout out to Chum. Thank you very much, pal. Okay, so we've got to get to Moe Davis, but before we do, I do have to play for you my first sponsor. This is a word from sponsor that we didn't solicit it. They're not paying. Okay, it's just a voice message that my brother sent me endorsing a product.
God damn, that Beyond sausage sandwich from the Dunkin'. You must eat these. You must have tried it. Those are good. Come on, bro. Come on. Tell me you're hitting the sausage. Then I realized that sounded weird.
Right. Yeah. Weird choice of words, bro. Got to hit that sausage. Thank you very much. That's my big brother, my best friend, Brian. Okay, so let's get to my conversation with Morris Davis. When I started the podcast, when I left SiriusXM, and I still don't know where this leaf of mine is going to land, I wrote down, I want to save the planet, although apparently that's not politically correct. If you don't like that phrase, tell me why not. But I said, I want to save the planet, I want to save our democracy, and I want to make the world a better place. And you can help me by subscribing to the podcast, by giving the podcast a rating, and of course, considering a paid subscription like over 200 other folks have on Patreon for as little as $5 a month. Just $5 a month. I never thought I'd be selling something quite like that, but I'm happy because I'm selling me, and I believe in me, and I know you do as well. So go to patreon.com, that's patreon.com/Pete Dominic, and sign up there. And now it's time for my conversation with Morris Davis. I think this conversation falls under the category of Save Our Democracy. Here it is. So joining me today is a man who I think has a tremendous amount of integrity and principle, unlike many that I've met in my life, to be honest with you. He's a retired Air Force colonel. He was the chief prosecutor at Guantanamo Bay Detention Facility, and he is now running for the United States Congress as a Democrat in North Carolina's 11th District for the seat currently held by Republican Mark Meadows. Ladies and gentlemen, Moe Davis, retired Colonel Morris Davis, thank you so much for joining me here today on the remote Skype in your what looks to be like a lovely cabin in North Carolina. House.
Thanks for having me. Yeah, it's a unique old cottage right in the middle of the path where the bears come through. So it's been a lot of fun living here.
Well, I am so happy and excited to be talking to you. And there's so much that I want to ask you and get to, and even hopefully to some of the issues that you care about, which is why you're running for Congress. But let's just try to understand why you've decided to run for Congress. I've been talking to you for years on the radio. I've been following you on Twitter. You're great with commentary, but you had a great career as an officer in the United States Air Force, a great career. One you've told me in the past you didn't even expect to be as long as it was maybe. Why not retire? Why not relax? Why are you running for Congress?
Well, I thought that's what I was going to be doing. When my wife and I, Lisa, and I'm down here in May, North Carolina was one of the worst states for gerrymandering. To me, the North Carolina GOP is just basically a crime syndicate because they've done everything they can to, rob, cheat, and steal to retain power. Clearly their two biggest fears down here are demographics and democracy. So when we got here, we bought property, we're building a house, and we were in the area that kind of looked like a hemorrhoid stuck onto the 10th congressional district, where the Republicans had tried to dilute the blue vote.
Hemorrhoid meaning a line that was drawn way out of place, a spot, a bump, a small annoying bump that was drawn to create a certain district.
We were a bulge. And what they had done, in fact, there may still be, there's a 5K or a 10K race or a run that runs the gerrymandered line. It splits down through, there's the University of North Carolina at Asheville. It ran through the middle of the campus. So depending on which dorm you lived in, one group was in one district, one was in another. But it was, it's patently obvious that the intent was to dilute the blue vote. Asheville, I've described, is if you picked up Berkeley and flew it across country and dropped it in the mountains, you'd have Asheville. And so there's a big pocket of blue progressive folks here in this area, and the Republicans split it down the middle to dilute it, and that's how you ended up with Patrick McHenry in the 10th district, and then Mark Meadows in the 11th. And so when we moved here, I was in the 10th district, and the Supreme Court, in June came out with a ruling based on North Carolina and Maryland on partisan gerrymandering. They said that doesn't violate the U.S. Constitution. So at that point, I just kind of wrote it off as being, the impossible dream. And then about 3 or 4 weeks ago, the state courts here in North Carolina said under the North Carolina Constitution that they had some equal protection problems with, clearly drawing lines to achieve a purpose. And they told the legislature either, you folks can fix this or we're going to fix it for you. They started redrawing the lines, and they put Asheville and Buncombe County back together in the 11th district, and suddenly this was a possibility.
So that created a lane for you to run, and you decided to go for it. And it's very exciting. This is the first candidate, Moe Davis, the first candidate I've donated to, and as long as I can remember, because I had kind of a principle against it when I was working at SiriusXM. I don't even know if I could defend it or not, but now the whole world has changed. So I was happy to donate to your campaign, and everybody else should too, I say. Moe Davis for Congress. I just lost the website.
Yes, MoeDavisFor Congress.com.
So go donate right now. You grew up there in North Carolina. You're not some carpetbagger. Tell me a little bit about your childhood. Your dad was in World War II, you were telling me.
Yeah, I grew up in Shelby, which is in Cleveland County. Depending on traffic, is hour and 15 minutes east of here. Spent my whole life growing up there in that community. My dad was a 100% disabled veteran of World War II. He was in a training accident where a truck flipped over, and everybody else in the back of the truck got thrown clear of it, landed on his back and broke his back. So, he left Rutherford County, North Carolina, as a healthy young man and came back 100% disabled. But he was always, really proud of his service and never complained about it. When I was growing up, he was the commander of the American Legion Post and was very active in Democratic politics. I've got the invitation that he got to attend JFK's inauguration. So, for me, this was North Carolina was always home. I left here at the age of 25 with the intention of coming back. And 4 years after I did a little bit of military service, and instead of 4 years, it took me 36 years to get back here. But this is, I don't know if you've ever had a place where you felt like you were connected and this is where you were meant to be.
Yeah.
These mountains have always had that appeal to me, that I've always felt like when I'm here, I'm home. So it's just a thrill to be.
In an effort to get to know you a little better, because I want you to share this with the people of North Carolina and the people, I want everybody listening to support you, because you can do that. You can send money from all over the country, obviously, and we could talk about whether or not that's appropriate, but you can, and everybody is. And so I want you to donate to Moe Davis for Congress. But in an effort to get to know you a little bit, because I have been talking a lot about my childhood and nature, growing up there in the mountains of North Carolina, I know I'm putting you on the spot, Mo, but what is an example of a great childhood memory for you growing up there?
I wouldn't necessarily say a great memory, but a very distinct memory. Like the earliest memories I have, as I said, my dad was 100% disabled from World War II. And he got his health care through the VA. And there's a big VA hospital here in Asheville. It's actually in an area called Otene. And I can remember my earliest memories, like 4 or 5 years old, my dad saying, "Hey, I got an appointment at Otene. Come on, go with me." And it seems like a little bit ironic that, it's 55 years later, and I'm walking through the exact same doors I walked through with him over a half a century ago. To get my health care. And that's just kind of etched in my mind, those trips up here to Otene with my dad for him to get care, or I'm going now to get mine.
That's a fascinating occurrence that you're now going to that same exact VA hospital. And we could talk about the VA and your thoughts on it and what you think could be done to improve it. But let's talk a little bit about your military career. What exactly did you do in the Air Force? What was your job? Why'd you join?
Well, I was in the JAG Corps. Growing up, I was probably would have been voted the person least likely to join the military, because that just wasn't anything that I seriously considered. Obviously, my dad served, my uncle served, my brother attended the Citadel, which is military college in South Carolina. And then he served in the Air Force. And I can't say that I ever really had a burning desire to serve in the military. In 1983, I went to law school and went to summer school both summers, so I graduated a semester early. So I took the February bar exam in 1983. I got the results back in April that I'd passed, and nobody was happier about that than my dad. I think he was more thrilled than I was. My dad, went to high school, but never went to college or law school.
Right.
For him, this was a big deal. And then a week after that, he had a heart attack and died.
Yeah.
During that time, before I went to law school, I worked for, there's a guy named Rufus Edmonston was the attorney general here in North Carolina.
Sounds like a character.
Yeah.
Sounds like a guy from a John Grisham novel.
Yeah, well, he was quite a character, and I guess still is. He lives up in Boone now, but I'd worked in his office, at the attorney general's office, and so my thought process had been when I got out of law school to go back there. In the interim, I'd applied for some other jobs. One was to the Air Force, just on a whim. And then my dad died, and I got a call from the Air Force saying, "Hey, you've been accepted. We'd like to send you to Cocoa Beach, Florida," which didn't sound too shabby. And I think I kind of felt like I owed it to him because he was always very proud of his service and never, like I said, never complained about being, 100% disabled. So I think it was just kind of the timing of it occurring soon after his death that I got the approval. And I thought, what the heck, for 4 years, if you're an attorney, you graduate from law school, you join a firm, you spend those first several years doing research for a partner to go to court, litigate the case. In the military, you're up on your feet in the courtroom, pretty soon after you get out of basic training. So, heck, it'll be good training. I can, feel like I kind of repaid my debt to my dad, and I'll be in Cocoa Beach, Florida. So I thought all those things combined, that was the right path. And I thought I'll do that for 4 years, and then I'll come back home to North Carolina.
And work in a private practice or something?
Well, probably, or like I said, I'd worked in state government, so I was kind of leaning, in that direction. But, I joined up for 4 years, and then they offered me a job up in D.C. as a circuit prosecutor, where in the more complicated cases, they bring in experienced counsel, rape cases, child molestation, the more serious types of offenses. And so I was offered a job to be a circuit prosecutor based out of D.C., but covering from North Carolina to Missouri, up to Maine and across to Iceland and the Azores.
Forgive me for not understanding. Forgive my ignorance for not understanding how military justice works. But when you talk, basically, if you're a JAG officer, the way that you're prosecuting cases of active duty members of the military. If you commit a crime while you're in the military, you are not. Explain to us how that works, so you don't have to hear me babble through it.
Yeah, we have the Uniform Code of Military Justice. It's been around since the 50s. It's been tinkered with a few times, but it's basically like the federal criminal code is in federal court, and for federal criminal offenses, the UCMJ applies to folks serving in the military, and we have our own military justice system. And so we have both. I spent my time as a prosecutor. I also spent, when I was at down in Florida, I was a defense counsel. So if a military member is accused of a crime, they get assigned a free active duty military defense counsel. And it's a very, people make fun of military justice and say, it's kind of like what military music is to music. But I can tell you from folks I worked with Guantanamo, there are a lot of civilian folks involved with the Guantanamo cases that said they came into the process very skeptical of the military and military justice and earned a very healthy respect for it. So it had been a great system up until 5 Deferment Don, intervened here recently and pardoned 3 military members that had either been convicted or accused of war crimes. So that kind of meddling and command influence seriously undermines the credibility of the military justice system.
Yeah, expand on that for a minute, if you could, Mo, because of your expertise and the fact that you were a member of the Air Force. When the President of the United States is giving these guys a pass, these Navy SEALs, or any other member of the military who's accused of these types of crimes, or even some of them committed them, and he just pardoned them, is my understanding. Sure. Why is the president's interference such a problem, and how do the people in your world see it? Is it a partisan thing at all?
Yeah, I think it's definitely a partisan thing. This was clearly a calculated move on Trump's part to curry favor with a segment of the
No, I mean, is it partisan in within the legal experts in the military, or do you all agree that his interference is bad? I mean, is it a general agreement, or is there a partisan indifference in the legal specialists inside the military?
Yeah, it's clearly, regardless, of course, the current example is Trump and what he's done, but historically, command influence, whether it's from a general officer who's in the chain of command, all the way up to the commander in chief, having that somebody put their finger on the scales to tip justice, I think in any system is bad, but particularly in a military system where, following the rules and regulations and maintaining that standard of integrity and conduct that's expected. When you have somebody that comes in and just wipes the slate clean, you may recall, I think one of the cases, I forget which one it was, where essentially the guy's entire platoon had testified at his court-martial about his misconduct. And to have the president swoop in and say, all is forgiven, seriously undermines, I think, morale and discipline and good order in the military, but it also sends a horrible message. We'd led the effort after World War II to, pass the Geneva Conventions, create the UN, the Convention Against Torture, all the things that we did post-World War II to try to elevate the standard that applied to militaries around the world. For us to excuse war crimes makes it really difficult then to try to hold other people accountable, and they can point to us and say, well, who are you to lecture us when you talk the talk, but you don't walk the walk. And it's just, I think.
And it puts Americans in danger, doesn't it?
What's that?
Doesn't it put active duty members of the military in great danger?
It does. I mean, one of the arguments you hear from time to time is that, well, we follow the standards of conduct and we abide by the laws of war and respect the Geneva Conventions, and the other side doesn't do that, whether it was in Vietnam or fighting Al Qaeda or ISIS or whoever is on the other side. But, we don't punch down to their level. You can't, insist or expect others to live up to a standard if you're not willing to live up to it yourself. And so the fact that the adversaries break the law and they green light for us to follow their down that path, and that's exactly what we've done. We're, I guess, beginning with the Bush administration and the enhanced interrogation techniques up until now with Trump pardoning war crimes. Over the last, since 9/11, we have pretty much undermined everything that we purported to stand for prior to us being attacked. And, it was easy for us to lecture, but, when the shoe was on the other foot, we quickly abandoned those principles that we tried to hold up for others.
Yeah, which is, another big part of your career and how I discovered you, because you became a pretty talked about person in the public and media when in October 2007, you resigned from your position as chief prosecutor at Guantanamo Bay detention facility. And you did that on a principle that you thought you couldn't, a standard that you just mentioned that you couldn't accept. And I always thought that was a rare thing in the private sector, much less in the public sector, to stand on that kind of a principle. Tell us what happened there, because you rose through the ranks pretty impressively in your career, and you get to that spot, chief prosecutor at Guantanamo Bay. It seems like a pretty big deal situation right there. But your dad would have been pretty impressed with that one too. So why would you resign? What happened?
Well, I took the job in September of 2005. I remember I had to fly. I was stationed in Cheyenne, Wyoming at the time, and had to fly into Washington, D.C. and do an interview with a guy named Jim Haynes, who was the general counsel for the Defense Department. And Jim Haynes was a guy who had never tried a case in his life, which I guess now under the Trump administration would make him qualified to be a Supreme Court justice. But at least back then, he was the DOD general counsel. Called me in for went to his office for the interview. And during the interview, he said, this could make you the most famous attorney in the world, like Robert Jackson during Nuremberg. And I don't think it ever connected with him. That military service isn't about what's this going to do for me.
Right.
It's about, serving your country and believing in principles that are worth fighting for. But in any event, I took the job. I took it on the understanding on the military side with my chain of command through the Judge Advocate General of the Air Force that, I was committed to doing it for as long as I felt we were doing full, fair, and open trials we could be proud of. And part of that was excluding any evidence obtained by torture. So in meeting with the prosecution team the first time I guess it would have been September of 2005 at our first big meeting, I told them, I said, look, I want us to conduct these trials in a way that we can be proud of. I said, people of my generation recall Nuremberg after World War II, that when the war ended, we didn't take all the Nazis out and shoot them. We gave them a trial, and some were convicted and some were executed, and others were acquitted. But we gave them a trial that people of my generation, I think, look at with a sense of pride and reverence that, that we didn't stoop to their level. We gave them due process and fairness. And I said, I want us to do Guantanamo in a way that our grandkids will look at it the way we look at Nuremberg. So we're not going to use any evidence obtained by torture. And quite frankly, we didn't need to. Khalid Sheikh Mohammed, for instance, orchestrated 9/11, is still sitting at Guantanamo, still hadn't been prosecuted. Now, I resigned. That was over a dozen years ago. And the trial is still pending. But like in his case, I think any first-year law student could go to court and prove KSM's guilt beyond a reasonable doubt without using anything he ever said while he was in U.S. custody. Now, that doesn't excuse what we did to him, but it makes it irrelevant in his criminal prosecution if we don't rely on any of that evidence. So,
because of what we did to him was we tortured the hell out of him.
Oh, yeah. I mean, it was funny. Well, not funny, but, back in the day when I was there, I couldn't use the torture. I couldn't say torture. It was called enhanced interrogation techniques. I was down at Guantanamo when there were 3 of the detainees that had attempted suicide, and you couldn't say suicide. It was self-injurious behavior. So, they came up with all these, it's like, the whole thing of unlawful enemy combatants.
Right, collateral damage.
Yeah, it's a term you will not find in the Geneva Conventions because it was a term that was created to avoid the Geneva Conventions. So we had all these euphemisms that were used to try to sanitize our dirty laundry, and certainly, torture falls in that category. I remember meeting with, in 2006, September 2006 was after the Supreme Court in the Hamdan case, kind of blew the military commissions out of the water and said Bush had to get Congress involved if he wanted to go that route. And I met with John McCain and Lindsey Graham, who that's before Lindsey lost his mind, but
I don't know what we would call him before, whatever he is now.
I can't explain. I think I've told you before, Pete, that the first trial I ever did was in 1984 when I was in the Air Force, and one of my opponents on the other side was Captain Lindsey Graham. So I've known him for a long, long time, and I just can't explain his behavior over the last year or so. But in any event, in 2006, when I met with him and McCain, I told him that my policy was and would be we would not use evidence obtained by torture. And I remember I was sitting at a table in a conference room in Senator Graham's office, and McCain was standing behind me. He put his hand on my shoulder and said, "I'm so glad to hear you say that."
Huh.
So it's amazing how.
And Lindsey Graham was like, "Well, maybe we can get around it somehow. I mean, listen, we got to fix this here," and then he.
You do a pretty good impression.
Made a baked ham. So so what happened? What happens next? Because
for the first 2 years I was in the job, that policy was supported up and down the chain of command. We were developing cases. As I said, there's ample evidence in all of these cases to go to court without using evidence obtained by torture. Some new folks came into the process, and suddenly in July of 2007, I had a new boss who was a general officer who said, "Look, President Bush said we don't torture, so who are you to say that we do?" And you got all this evidence that shows these guys are guilty that you're not using. You need to get that evidence and get into court, and we need convictions. This is dragging on too long. We got to get the show on the road. Right. When he first said it, it was kind of said in a joking manner, but it became clear over the next week or so that it was no joke, that I was expected to use evidence obtained by torture. So I filed a complaint, went all the way up to the Deputy Secretary of Defense, who was a guy named Gordon England at the time, under Gates. And I received a written order that said I would report directly to the general officer that told me I had to use that evidence, and he would report directly to Jim Haynes, the DOD General Counsel, who was the author of the torture memo, the one that Rumsfeld signed in the margin. I stand up for 12 hours a day, so why is it I can't make the detainees stand up? So when that became my chain of command,
I'd almost forgotten.
Yeah, that was when it was clear that full, fair, and open trials were not going to be in the cards. And so I went back to my office and sent my resignation that I was not going to participate in that process.
Well, hold on a second. What is the process in your mind? You didn't just go back to your office. You must have thought that through. You talked about it with, I don't know, your wife or a close friend. I mean, how was it that easy, or was it that difficult to resign your post there?
It was, ultimately, in my view, I could.
Because what does it mean for your career? Like, what were you weighing out? If you did,
well, trust me. I mean, I knew that this was not going to be a career-enhancing move. Bucking the system. It's kind of like you've seen lately with Lieutenant Colonel Vindeman, who, testified and told the truth, and you saw the blowback from the administration on him. I knew, calling out the Bush administration on torture was not going to be a career enhancer. But, knew that there are worse things in life than retiring as a colonel. So I figured, if not me, who? Because I had a bunch of young folks working for me that had, families and, bills and expenses and careers ahead of them. If I wasn't going to stand up and throw the bullshit flag on this, then who was? So, I knew going into it that the worst that could happen was they'd make me retire as a colonel. And that didn't, to be able to look at myself in the mirror the next day and still be able to feel good about myself. That was worth the.
Well, there's not enough Moe Davises out there, which is why I'm excited that a guy like yourself is running now for Congress. Because when I think about, you do, I think it's kind of a perfect example. How do you campaign for a congressional seat in terms of applying to win people's approval on your integrity? How do you prove that you have a lot of integrity to run for this office, for this body where so many people don't have any respect for this body because they think everybody's a sellout and everybody's unprincipled? And so you actually have this really interesting record in the military, as well as what you did, what we just talked about. How are you handling, or how are you thinking about that as you run for the seat of Mark Meadows? I mean, how do you cash in on that, for lack of a better phrase, to prove to people that integrity matters, principle matters, and you're going to be a guy with principle if you run for Congress? Because most people think, well, maybe he is now, but he'll sell out.
Yeah, it's I'm sure after I ended up leaving the military, I went to work as the head of the Foreign Affairs Defense Trade Division at Congressional Research Service. And when Obama began to backpedal on his pledge to close Guantanamo Bay, I did an op-ed in the Wall Street Journal, and I got fired the next day for writing the op-ed. Criticizing.
That's right. Another stand-on principle.
Right. And in that case, I was called in, and I was told that look, if you'll admit what you did was wrong and apologize, then you can continue on. And I said, look, if I sat here and told you that I didn't have the right to express my opinion in my personal capacity, I'd be making a false official statement. That's not what I believe. I spent 25 years defending the right of free speech, and I'm not going to sit here and tell you that I don't have it in order to keep my job. And of course, I got fired. I was on unemployment for the next 6 months because no one would hire me. I was too toxic, because I had clearly offended the Republican Party when I stood up to Bush, and now I'd burnt my bridges with the Democratic Party by standing up to the Obama administration. And eventually the ACLU stepped in. We spent 7 years fighting that battle and eventually prevailed. So I've got a record with both parties at the highest level of having stood up to do the right thing. Now, other people say they will do the right thing, but people can Google my name and look at my story and see that I haven't just talked the talk, I've walked the walk.
By the way, how did you, a lot of people listening, including the guy talking to you, wonders what it's like. How did you handle that period, that time period, collecting unemployment? You know, I mean, I'm in this transition now, and it's really, you can go down all kinds of dark roads in your mind. And how did you deal with that? Did you feel okay because you stood on principle and financially you thought, well, I'll be fine? I mean, how did you deal with it? Were you in your shop at home building things? What did you do with your time?
Yeah, it was a strange period. I'm sure you're kind of going through the same thoughts.
I'm in a shitstorm. It's fascinating and terrifying at the same time.
It is. I would do the same thing again. I don't regret what I did, but it reminded me, I remember when I was a kid growing up in Shelby, a buddy and I had climbed up an oak tree, and I ended up falling out and landing on my back from like 10 or 12 feet up in the air. And I can remember, just, have you ever had the breath knocked out of you?
Oh, yeah.
But emotionally, it felt like, after, getting fired for doing the right thing, it was
right.
The breath had been knocked out of me because I believed our country was better than that. And eventually it kind of went from, I felt, I guess, kind of pity for myself that, here I've done the right thing. I'm getting punished for it, to kind of being pissed off that, by God, I'm not going to, they think I'm going to roll over and just let this go. And I'm not. And so, like I said, the ACLU stepped in. I guarantee you that, they spent in excess of probably $1 million fighting for me to vindicate the First Amendment right of public employees to have to express their personal opinions. And so I got, I think having people like that rally around me, I think kind of pulled me out of that funk and made me want to fight. And eventually, there's always a silver lining, and the dark clouds lifted and life went on, and I got off unemployment and went on to, do things I really enjoyed. I taught at Howard Law School for 4 years. I was an administrative law judge at the Department of Labor up until we moved here. We moved down to Asheville on May the 28th. I still had decisions I hadn't finished writing, so I teleworked and finished up writing some opinions, and officially resigned from there on September the 6th. So, and at the moment, living in the moment, it can be overwhelming, but in hindsight, I feel pretty good about the way things turned out.
Well, I'll go back. We'll talk about me in a year and go back and revisit it. So let's talk about Mark Meadows. This is the guy whose seat that you want to take. He's current congressman representing the 11th district in North Carolina. We talked about the gerrymandering.
Representing the 11th district. He occupies the seat from the 11th district.
I know you're raring to go here, and everybody should read his Twitter feed. It's awesome, and he keeps very, very up to date with tweeting things. And you're not holding back at all in your criticism and calling him out and mentioning him at Rep Mark Meadows. And you can follow Moe Davis, who I'm obviously talking to, at COL Morris Davis. So what is it? You've been very harsh and very critical of Mark Meadows, but tell me just real quick before we get to him about this district. It's going to be hard for you to win, isn't it? A Republican-leaning district.
Well, yeah, it is. It was a 3 weeks ago, before the new maps were drawn, it was a plus 20. So for Meadows, he's been elected 4 times, and at least the last couple of times there were no debates, there were no town halls. I mean, it was pretty much all he had to do is get his name on the ballot, and he was guaranteed a seat in Congress, because that 20-point advantage was insurmountable. So the Democrats didn't put at the national level didn't put resources behind it, because they put those where they thought they could have some potentially pick up a win. And this area was just so far in the red that there was no way to overcome that. The new lines are more favorable. There's more like a 7 or 8 point Republican lean, which isn't great, but it's better than 20 or 22. And I think what really makes it competitive is that Mark Meadows, as I've traveled around, I've asked people, what can you tell me that Mark Meadows has done that's made life better for you and your family? And nobody's got an answer for that question because he hadn't done anything. If you recall, he started out, he was one of the founders of the Freedom Caucus, where they just ranted and raved about Obama and deficit and debt.
Right.
Forgetting the fact that Obama inherited the Great Recession from the Bush administration. But he spent his first years, railing against Obama, and then now Trump's in office. We've had another $3.1 trillion of debt piled onto the taxpayers' back to create this sugar high economy. And Mark Meadows went from being just vociferous about the debt to being lead lackey for the Trump administration.
Yeah, he's around Trump. He's very, very close with the president. And what does that mean with the people of your district? How much of a litmus test is the whole pro-anti-Trump in your district? I mean, there's got to be a lot of people, if Meadows is your rep, that are these kind of Fox News untouchables, unchangeables. And by the way, do you think you can win over any of their votes?
Well, I think the diehard Trumpers, I mean, how do you win over somebody that won't accept facts?
Yeah, no, I don't know. It's a whole different universe that they're living, or I often interpret it as they accept the same set of facts, but they don't care about, they'll cheat to win. Like, as you call them a crime syndicate, the Republican Party in North Carolina cheats to win a lot. And I guess a lot of people just don't mind cheating to win, which is sad, but how can we argue with them?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's like a drowning man. When you know you're drowning, you grab onto anything you can to try to save yourself. And I think for the North Carolina Republican Party, as I said, demographics and democracy are not their friends. And so
I don't know about that metaphor. It seems more like, I'm sorry, it seems more like I'm drowning and they just hold my head under. They're not trying to help, but they're cheating. It's unprincipled, and you're a principled person.
Well, certainly here, I mean, we've got the prime example, the congressional race that just got decided not long ago because they're, stuffing the ballot box and rigging the outcome. So all this, gerrymandering, voter suppression, voter fraud, they've done every dirty trick in the book to try to keep power. That's like the congressional race. Right now, there are 13 districts. If you go back and add up the totals from all the congressional races in 2018, Democrats got over 50% of the vote, and they got 25% of the seats. And that's because, the lines were drawn to achieve a purpose. But, back to winning this district in a red tilt area, I don't, Ron White, the comedian, had that whole bit on you can't fix stupid. And I've quit trying. So, the diehard Trumpers, if they feel like that he needs 4 more years and they need Mark Meadows there to support him, then I'm not going to win those votes. But I think there were a lot of people in this area that looked at Trump, and I think they looked at Bernie Sanders kind of the same way too, that they weren't beholden to the party. They wanted somebody that would go break glass and stand up for them. They felt like they were forgotten, that the machines of both parties had kind of hijacked the process. I think some of those people who did that, you can look at the last 3 years, the immorality, the caging children, abandoning the Kurds. I mean, there's a whole list of things that I would hope that for those people that still have some sense and decency that may have voted for Trump and Meadows last time will say, hey, this is, a step too far to continue supporting this. And particularly, I saw Meadows the other day. He was bragging about the Trump, the marvelous Trump economy, and unemployment's 3.5%, and isn't Trump wonderful? Things may be great where Mark Meadows lives. When hanging out on Madison Avenue, it may be great, but in Madison County, the unemployment rate's 4%, which sounds pretty good. The poverty rate's almost 20%. It's that way in a lot of the counties out in this district where the unemployment figures are good. The poverty rate is, 16, 18, 20%. So what does that tell you? It tells you that people are working, they're not earning a living. So, what's Mark Meadows done to help? Our uninsured rate out in this area is about 50% over the national average.
Wow, that's bad.
Our schools, there was an article in our local paper, the Asheville Citizen-Times, that looked at test scores on reading and math. And for the kids out in the western part of North Carolina, they're in the bottom 25% of the country. So I think the pitch that might have some appeal. Remember Trump, when he was campaigning, asking for the African American community to support him. He said, "What do you got to lose?" Well, I can kind of say the same thing in Western North Carolina to the people that supported Trump that now have no health care. They're working 2 jobs and their kids are getting a crappy education. What do you got to lose? You've given him 4 terms, and look at what you've got. Why don't you give me a shot for 2 years? Let's see if we can't do much better than what he's done for you. Because if you follow him on Twitter, you'll see he's very prolific. But every tweet is about shielding Donald Trump from accountability. He never mentions North Carolina, much less the 11th district.
Have you met him?
No, well, I haven't. I've seen him. When I was working in Washington, I was in a couple of events where he was there. But as far as actually having a conversation with him, no, I haven't.
I hope he's scared of you. He's got to be. You have this big following of celebrities as well. I mean, not just Pete Dominic, but I mean some big celebrities. And looks like on your launch, you've done hopefully pretty well in terms of raising money. I hate that idea that you have to raise so much money because it means you have to spend a lot of time asking for money and finding out ways to raise money and promote everything to get money. And that's a huge, seemingly in my mind, part of the broken part of the system. How has that been going for you? And how much do you think about the money in the system? Because I believe you, sir, are a very principled guy. I think that you're not. There's no doubt in my mind that you've gotten into this for all of the right reasons. You're super smart. You'll be great on the issues. Your morality, your sense of mission. I get it, but you still have to spend a lot of time raising money, and a lot of people raise money from places, and then they go and vote in the interests of those industries. So how's that been going, and what do you think of that as a problem?
Yeah, we got off to a really good start. I'm late to the game. There are a couple other Democrats. A couple other Democrats that are running. There's one person who's a veteran he ran for the nomination. He ran in the last election and lost to the person that lost to Meadows. And I. Like I said, he's a veteran, but he's a guy that has been certainly going around behind my back trying to sabotage me as a carpetbagger and that kind of stuff. There's another lady in the race who ran in 2018 and lost to Patrick McHenry in the 10th district, and she lost to him in the Republican primary because she is a lifelong Republican who owns a house and lives in Kings Mountain. But as of this week, she's now a Democrat in Asheville. So those are kind of what I'm up against. My disadvantage is that the lines were just redrawn a couple of weeks, like 2 weeks ago, when they were officially approved. So I'm late to the game where they've been out. I know the one guy last night I was at an event. He was there and he said it was his 165th event he'd been to. I've been to 5, and I don't have time. Early voting starts in February. The primary's on March 3rd, so I've got less than about 85 days to the primary, about 60 to get to the early voting. And I don't have time to put up with the nonsense of other Democrats trying to, undermine the race. I think the issue is who is best qualified to take on Mark Meadows. And I think, like you mentioned, I've got a pretty substantial following on Twitter with a lot of high visibility people that can, or influencers, that I think we can. Folks I've talked with say that they think it'll take about $3 to $5 million to beat Mark Meadows. And I just don't think there's anyone else on the Democratic side that can generate anywhere near that kind of money. We went live the first night. One thing I learned in this process, Pete, is you always hear that expression about jumping into the race. There's no jumping in. It's a very slow wade because there's about 9 yards of administrative stuff you have to go through to get to run. Like that first day, it was on a Friday is when the state Senate approved the new maps and put us back together here in Buncombe County. So I went to to get on Act Blue, you've got to have a bank account. So I went to the bank and they said, we got to have an EIN, and you can get it from the IRS online Monday through Friday. That was Saturday. So Monday I go online to get the EIN, go back to the bank, and it's like, well, you have to have a certificate from the Board of Elections. So, this jumping in notion is a bit of a, anybody that's run knows you don't jump in. So we officially got up and running on, actually tonight will be 3 weeks. And that first night I asked couple of folks to help me out. Tom Arnold, Kathy Griffin, Alyssa Milano all helped get the word.
Wow. That's awesome. And what happened?
Between 7:30 and midnight, we raised about $15,000.
Oh, that's great, Mo. That's great. I'm glad to hear that. But just, I mean, the idea that you got to go out there and raise money, isn't that wrong? Isn't that a waste of? Shouldn't people who are trying to win public office be, focus as much as they can on the people and the issues rather than the amount of time that we have to spend making money? $5 million you got to raise from people, and I don't want to give money away to people running for office. Nobody really, But I mean, what do you think? Isn't that an issue? Or no?
It's unfortunately right now it's the fact of life that I've got to raise the money to get the work.
Indeed, it is. That's the system we're in.
And particularly for me, like I said, other people have been campaigning all year for this race, and I've been in it for a little more than 2 weeks. So trying to get the message out, before the early voting starts in February takes money, and that's just an unfortunate fact of life. One thing I'm not doing that the two opponents that I mentioned that are in the race, I'm not taking PAC money. And they both share their FEC filings. You'll see they both have taken PAC money. I'm taking money from individuals. I've had donations from every state in the country. I think South Dakota was the last one to come on board. We've got all 50 states, the territories. It's really been, we've had some folks that have mailed in, and some of the notes that I've gotten, some I can't repeat the words that they use, but some of the others, from across the country, it's very clear that there is no love lost for Mark Meadows anywhere in America. And so folks.
Yeah, that's part of the reason why people must be donating, because they don't like that. They hate this guy so much that whoever's going to take him on, they want to support.
Right.
Well, listen, it's Moe Davis for Congress.com. I made a donation. I'll make more. And we got a lot of generous people listening to this show now. And hopefully they'll consider a donation too, because part of what we're trying to do here on the podcast, one part is save democracy. I know that's what you want to do. I know how serious you understand how serious of a situation we're in. So thanks for talking to me, Mo. And I appreciate you giving me so much time. And hopefully, our interview lets voters and other folks that may want to donate get to know you a little bit better. I've got to know you over the years, which is why I'm so excited to support you and so excited that you're running. So thank you, sir, very much for joining me today. And best of luck, and we'll stay on it.
Privilege and a pleasure. So I always enjoy talking with you, Pete.
All right. Well, there you go. Morris Davis. Moe Davis for Congress.com. Follow him on Twitter at COL Morris Davis. Hashtag Mountain Strong. Morris Davis, bringing democracy back. Love that guy. And he's a very talented, smart fella. Even plays guitar and sings. He made a video and posted it on Twitter of a little song he wrote for the incumbent, the despicable Mark Meadows. Here's that to end today's podcast, and we will talk to you Friday. Thank you very much for subscribing on Patreon. Moe Davis, take it away.
The people say he's no good, can't be gone too soon. He kisses Trump's butt in the morning, every night and afternoon. He had a gerrymandered district where poverty is high. He said he'd fight for the people. That was a big fat lie. Now 2020's a coming. Old Mark Meadows has got to go. Now change is coming. Hope you get out and vote for Moe. Yeah, change is coming. Please get out and vote for Moe. See the polls.